Welcome to the Jobology podcast. I'm your host, Brandon, and today my guest is the national sales trainer for a medical company. She's going to talk to us all about how she helps out young salespeople in the field and how you can't be afraid of blood when you want to do this job. So, without further ado, Delaney. First, I'd just like to say thank you for being with me today.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Brandon. My technical title is Sales Training Specialist for LAAC, which stands for Left Atrial Appendage Closure. It's one of our franchises at Boston Scientific.
Okay.
But yes, there's me and my partner that I work with, Karen, and we have another teammate, Chad. So
Nice.
there's three of us on the team, and we are the three national trainers for that particular procedure.
Okay, cool. So you kind of had just mentioned it, you kind of jumped my first question there, but hey, that's all good. I like it, but the thing I always like to ask first, so we can kind of, understand exactly what we're talking about is what is the title on your business card versus like, how would you describe that to somebody, what you do if, we met at a party or something like that. And I was like, hey, what do you do for work? How would you answer that question versus like what officially, I guess, is your title?
Totally, yeah. So my official title is Principal Sales Training Specialist.
Okay.
We have different levels. I actually was just promoted to principal last year, so that's
Nice.
kind of like the
Congratulations.
highest level you can get. Thank you. I worked very hard for it.
Heck yeah.
That's my official title. But then when people say, well, so you're a sales training specialist, you teach people how to sell. What exactly are you selling?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I'll like delve into, well, I work for this division it's called the Watchman device.
Mm-hmm.
And it's technically called LAAC, or left atrial appendage closure.
Okay.
And we are under the umbrella of AF solutions, or atrial fibrillation solutions, which is the most common cardiac arrhythmia you can have. And, there's millions of patients that have it. So obviously we are one of the solutions for that patient type. Like, what do I tell people at a party is it's so much easier just to say, oh, well, I'm the national trainer for the Watchman device. And then they're always like, what is that? So then I elaborate a little bit. Then I teach sales technically because we are a medical device sales organization. But at the end of the day, our primary curriculum that I'm responsible for is for the clinical sales.
Oh,
So I work with anyone that's going to be working in the operating rooms with our physicians.
wow. Okay. That's like whoosh, way over my head. This is why I do these things. I like to learn and find out new, avenues that people can do. So this is going to be very interesting. How do you get involved in this? Like, how do you come across this company? How do you become my guess would be like, hey, I was really good at sales. I kicked butt. And then they were like, you should start training everybody how to do this. But I have no idea. So how do you get to where you're at, and kind of like, what's the why, why do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So normally, yes, that's one pathway where you are really good at sales. Maybe you worked for like Xerox or
Mm,
Enterprise or any one of the like starter sales companies, so to speak.
sure.
And then you were picked up by a medical device company, and then you established yourself within the sales organization there. And then they, called upon you and said, hey, you should come into training. Training is usually a developmental role that's like
Okay.
you're in there for a couple of years, and then somewhere there's an opportunity where you say, oh, I want to go do that. And then
Hmm.
because you have the experience in the field and in house, then they call upon you to go do the more elevated role because you
Got
then
it.
have more leadership experience. So, um, that being said, um, my uh, my pathway to
Yeah.
it was a little bit unorthodox.
Nice. We love unorthodox stories.
Love it, right? So I started in pharmaceutical sales
Okay.
and did that for a couple of years. And then because I had launched a product that had to do with atrial fibrillation, it was a blood thinner.
Okay.
Um, my then manager, or my soon to be manager, I guess at the time, he called me up on LinkedIn. So
Nice.
anyone out there who does not own a LinkedIn or doesn't manage their LinkedIn, I would definitely recommend that because I've gotten both my jobs now with LinkedIn.
Okay.
Um, And so he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I see that you have atrial fibrillation experience. You've launched a blood thinner. This is this device that just got FDA approval. We're interested. We need, more people on the team." So I interviewed, and I actually interviewed for a different role than I ended up
Nice.
getting, because when I went in for my interview, they realized, hey, you know what? We're not quite ready to hire this role just yet. But
Hmm.
we want you to be a clinical specialist. And I said immediately yes. I was
Sure.
so excited. And John, my then manager, he said, "It's going to be really hard." I was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
well, okay, I'm excited. I can do
I'm
it."
ready.
So I started with that. I worked in the clinical space for about 4 years covering cases. I covered almost, gosh, probably 1,100
Oh wow.
procedures for this device. And
Jeez.
I became a field trainer. I loved coaching. And then shortly thereafter, becoming a field trainer, I was maybe field trainer for a couple of years.
Hmm.
Um, I was pulled into this role now, and I absolutely love it. It's
Nice.
been really, really fun. I absolutely love developing people. That's a real big passion of mine, and leading and coaching and seeing them grow. So that's kind of a little bit of my why.
Okay. Yeah, that makes some sense. So, um, I like that kind of path. I like the path of like, hey, I went to school for this. I found a job after, I like that path too, don't get me wrong. But I feel like that's like the more traditional path. Everyone always knows that path. So they're like, okay, if I have to go to school for it, I know what that means. I know what I got to do. But when it's like, well, hey, this didn't really, I wasn't planning for this. It just kind of came about. I like that where people can then realize like, oh, there's other alternatives out there. There's other routes out there. I don't have to just, fall into this one stream. I can do other things.
For sure. Yeah, no, that I'm dealing with that right now. I have a younger brother who's 26 and is an engineering student, and his
Nice.
girlfriend who did pre-med, and she's now exploring the medical device world saying,
Hmm.
"I think I could do this. I wasn't planning on it, but I think I could do, something like what you do." I was like, "Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's really fun." So, it's a lot of work for sure, but it's also very rewarding.
Right. Before we get too further, much more into this without, touching on exactly what it is, what is the Watchman device? Like, how would you describe it?
That is a good question. I'm so bad right now. I normally have one with me.
Okay, no worries.
But so the Watchman device it almost looks like a little parachute. It's www.watchman.com. Anyone can go look up a picture of it. But it looks kind of like a little parachute, and it's got
Hmm.
this little threaded insert up top. It's got a little fabric cap stretched across a nitinol frame.
Okay.
And the device acts almost as a cork. And it goes
Okay.
into this pocket in your heart called your left atrial appendage. So your heart has four chambers, right? You have your top two, your atria, and your
Hmm.
bottom two, your ventricle. The right side of your heart pumps blood to your lungs. You take a deep breath.
Hmm.
That blood gets oxygenated. It comes through your pulmonary veins into the left side of your heart, into your left atrium. In a perfect world, your heart's beating normally. It goes from your left atrium through your mitral valve to your left ventricle, through your aorta, and then all of your extremities get oxygenated blood, right? So, if you have atrial fibrillation, instead of contracting normally, your atria is kind of quivering. It's fibrillating, right? But it's
Hmm.
quivering. So, what happens is this little pocket, the left atrial appendage, um, normally fills with blood. Blood goes in, blood goes out. It kind of acts as um, an added pressure chamber, right? So, for
Okay.
example, if you eat too much sodium and all of a sudden your blood pressure goes up, um, and you have a higher left atrial pressure, that extra little pocket can accommodate without your heart saying, "Wait, that's too much volume. I can't handle
Got
it,"
it.
right? Or "That's too
Okay.
much pressure." So it helps accommodate that volume normally. So everybody's born with one. It's part of our embryological development.
Sure.
So when you have AFib, though, it was your friend. Well, now it might be your foe, right? So now blood goes in, and because your heart's quivering, it doesn't quite have enough oomph to get that
Oomph.
blood back
Hmm.
out. So then when blood sits, it clots, right? So you see where
Hmm.
I'm going with this? So then
Yes.
you have a
Yes.
clot formed in this pocket.
Hmm.
Then if, patient comes, they cough or they auto convert back into normal sinus rhythm, for example, then that little clot now that's formed can come out of the appendage into the atrium, into the ventricle, through your aorta. Now it's going into your coronaries, it's going into your brain, it's causing a
Yeah.
stroke, right? There's all different horrible places that it could go.
Right.
So insert the Watchman,
Gotcha.
and that's where we go in. It's minimally invasive. We go through the right or left femoral vein. Usually the right is just easier for the physician. And it's the catheter is about the size, more or less, smaller than this pen, right?
Oh
It goes
wow.
through your vein. It's about,
Huh.
well, I say 15 French, but sometimes if you're in medicine, you'll know what that means. But otherwise,
Yeah.
so some of the listeners, if they know French sizes, but it's so it goes up the femoral vein, the catheter does, and we go into the right side of the heart. We just make
Mhm.
a small, we call it a transeptal puncture, which is just through the lining that goes between each chamber, through
Okay.
the right from the right atrium to the left atrium.
Following along.
Then the device gets deployed into this pocket, and obviously the clinical team, which is the team that I train, they have to verify that the device is properly sized, that the device is properly placed. If it's not, obviously we can reposition it, no problem. But that is where the clinical team is so valuable for the
Mhm.
physicians that we work with, because, you know, sometimes like they're usually experts on imaging, you know, so they're kind of looking at it like, oh, I don't think that device is in a good spot. Let's go ahead and, you know, maybe it's too proximal, it's hanging too far out. So we need
Gotcha.
to recapture it and advance it a little bit. So there's a lot of little nuances to the
Hmm.
procedure that our clinical special, we call them Watchman clinical specialists, that they're expected to pick up on by the time that they're certified.
Nice. That's, I mean, again, like I said, phew, phew, phew. But I'm I was following along with what you were saying, so it does make sense, like a cork or kind of like a, you know, parachute. It does look like a parachute because I looked it up online, but it looks a lot bigger online. I was like, where the heck does that go?
It does look so big online.
Yeah, because they have to, like, you know, blow it up to show you what's going on. But when you said it's like the pen, I was like, oh wow, okay.
That's the size of the catheter that goes through. But the
Hmm.
biggest one, I mean, is about, well, let's see. We're working on a next generation one that will have a bigger
Nice.
size, but the biggest one currently is 35 millimeters across.
Okay.
So just to
Wow.
give you perspective, it's probably a little bit bigger than like a $50 coin,
Okay.
more or less. The
Hmm.
smallest one is only 20 millimeters. So you look at that, and it probably is around the size, more or less, of a dime
That's what I was. Okay.
when it expands. So they get deployed, the device sits in the appendage, and then blood can still go in because you see that fabric in that
Yeah,
picture.
it's like mesh.
Yeah, that mesh fabric. It's a
Mm.
PET fabric, or polyethylene terephthalate. It goes in, and if there's a clot that forms behind the device, it won't come out.
Gotcha.
And then that fabric ends up endothelializing. So eventually it's corked off permanently and it's
Mm.
totally sealed. But for about 45 days or so, that it acts more as a filter than it does a total plug.
Okay. Would you ever have to replace it?
Nope, it's one and done, which is why our clinical team is so important, because once you release it, that's it. It's in there
Hmm.
forever. You know, God forbid, like unless something happens unfortunately to the patient,
Sure.
right? But for that, yeah, once it's in the proper spot, then yeah, it's good. Obviously, there's parameters, like for example, these patients are in atrial fibrillation, so sometimes they're subject to what's called a cardioversion. So
Okay.
we actually have parameters. They're not supposed to be cardioverted within 30 days of implant, because it's still settling in, right? You don't want to cardiovert the patient and have them jump off the
Boom.
table, um,
Yes.
and have their heart jump and then knock it out of place.
Move
So
it. Sure.
yeah, obviously, we have parameters on that in our directions for use, but
Cool.
no, otherwise it's one and done. It's in there and you're good to go. There's no batteries or anything you have to worry about replacing.
That's cool. When you're like when you or your team, or I mean, we'll get into kind of that a little bit more, so I'm not sure exactly how it would work, but when you're selling this device, are you selling it to like doctors, or are you selling it to insurance companies? Like, who is your primary like market that you would market this to?
That's a great question. So we have a whole phenomenal marketing team at the
Mm-hmm.
company that works. We have different strategy plans for that. Like we have, it's called DTP or DTR, like direct to patient, direct to
Mm-hmm.
referral marketing. Um, Normally, because it's an implant, we're more specific to sell to the physicians
Okay.
because they know if their or if they know if their patients are a good candidate, right?
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, makes
um,
sense.
it's one thing to let patients know and make them aware, like, hey, this exists. Ask your doctor if you're a good candidate.
Hmm.
What we don't want is, patients saying, oh, well, I'm on a blood thinner. I could get a Watchman. It's like, well, you're on a blood thinner for a different reason. You don't have
Right.
non-valvular atrial fibrillation, right? It's a
Yeah.
very specific patient type. I mean, there's millions of patients that have non-valvular AFib, but there's even more patients that are on blood thinners for other reasons that don't realize why they couldn't come off of a blood thinner. Maybe they're at risk for something else or they have a mechanical valve or something like that. So that's kind of where we more so speak to the physicians, like the referring physicians, maybe that don't implant, but they would send their patients that they have to the physicians that are doing the procedure.
Gotcha. Okay. And so something I find fascinating about this job, my job that I do, talking to everybody about their jobs is like, what does an average day look like? So I am very like, if you said, what's a garbage man do or what's a zookeeper do? I have an idea, you know what I mean? Like they got to go pick up the trash. I'm sure they got to pick up the truck, drop it off. But I don't know if you were like, what do they do hour by hour? No
Yeah.
clue. Couldn't tell you. Like, don't know if they have paperwork they have to do, don't do, whatever. So what, kind of like, hour by hour or chunk of hour by hour, what does your day like average kind of look like? Like, what time do you get up? Do you have to go to an office? Do you start? Do you end? What does that kind of look like?
Well, yeah. So normally, I mean, I'm an early riser anyway, just because weeks that I'm in Minnesota, I don't have a choice, right? Like you
Yeah.
have to be at the office really early
Hmm.
to start our training sessions. I mean, when we're there, like last week, for example, I flew into Minnesota on Sunday.
Okay.
Woke up, actually Monday morning was pretty easy. I got to take a couple of our field trainers that came in to help. I got to take them to breakfast because we didn't have
Nice.
that early of a start because people were flying in still in the morning. We started at noon, more or less, at the training center. We held a training until about 6 o'clock that evening.
Oh, wow.
Uh, then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we had what's called a phase one, where we had brand new trainees come in. It's like, hey, welcome to
Nice.
Boston Scientific. Here's our whole spiel about, Watchmen and compliance and don't break the rules and do X, Y, and Z. So we had a pretty sizable class then. And that, of course, runs, 8 to 5. Then our team, because we're all there, we have to debrief. So then usually, myself, my teammate, Karen and Chad that I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
and some of the field trainers that are there, we will go to dinner and we'll kind of debrief with each other. Hey, how'd so and so do today? What are your thoughts? And then if we don't get caught by the trainees in the lobby, usually we're in bed by like 9:30 or 10.
Nice.
But
Yeah.
sometimes the trainees catch us, and we end up having a drink with them, or catching up, and they ask us several questions. But that's probably an average day in Minnesota. But
Okay.
then there are remote weeks as well, much like today. Same thing, I'm up usually before like 7, more or
Sure.
less. Sometimes I'll get a workout in the morning, workout in the evening.
Nice.
Um, and then I'm on my computer quite a bit, or I'm on the phone. I actually, prior to this call, was on the phone with one of our VPs of a different device that we're currently cross training with. They kind of
Cool.
joined our umbrella division, if that makes sense. So I was
Nice.
talking to her about some of the people that I'm cross training, and kind of giving her a debrief. And it's interesting. You're kind of, my customers, as this internal position, are now more so the managers. Like, I don't talk to the,
Okay.
I talk to the new hires and their managers. So their managers are the one like, hey, I want to get this person trained.
Hmm.
How are they doing? So it's more like people management, influencing things like that, versus what I used to do, which was talking to the physicians every day.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense. Do you have a home base? Is Minnesota technically your home base?
Well, I pay rent in San Diego.
Okay.
How often I'm there is a different story entirely. Like when you were saying, "Oh, Pacific time," I'm like, I'm normally on Pacific time, but not always.
Not right now. Yeah.
And then Minnesota's where headquarters are.
Okay.
And then, of course, right now I'm on mountain time because I'm in Salt Lake with my
Yeah.
parents. They moved here a couple years ago.
Nice. Okay. So it's a job that you can do kind of, wherever, but there is a headquartered area that you would have to go to.
Right. Yeah. Certain weeks I can work remote, which is great. I absolutely love that flexibility. I'm currently planning a wedding, so that's like,
Nice.
my fiance and I are dealing with all the drama
Us
and
too.
stress and fun that comes with that. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so we're doing that, and so it's nice
Mhm.
having certain weeks where, if it's noon and I'm not anywhere, like I can take a phone call or
Right.
talk to my wedding planner or anything like that. It's a lot smoother.
So yeah, makes balancing things a little bit more easy than
Mhm.
traditional if you were like 9 to 5 unreachable. Okay, I like that. Um, I'm assuming this job has regular benefits. Like, are you salary, hourly? How does that work? And then, if you don't mind, if you do, you can say, "Hey, I don't want to talk about that," and we'll move on to the next bit. Or, is there like a pay range for your position that people could look at or know? Like, hey, if I'm applying to this, this is what you can kind of expect ish to make.
Yeah, so I do make a salary. I'm sure there's positions within Boston Scientific that are hourly, like if you work in manufacturing. So I don't
Sure,
want to say most of us are salary because I know that there
gotcha.
are some hourly
But
positions.
at your level, what you're doing,
Correct. Yeah, this level,
okay.
or even the people that I'm training,
Hmm.
when you come in as a clinical specialist, like you are paid a salary, and
Nice,
then you get bonuses, right? So,
cool.
and then in our role, like my teammate Karen and Chad and myself, we make, you add that up, we make a little bit more than that
Mhm.
because we are training them, but we don't get the hefty bonuses that the field gets.
Right. It's that trade-off of like, hey, a little bit more, I can count on this every month, every week, every whatever, however often you're getting paid versus the like, yeah, but I could get if I'm doing my job correctly, I could maybe hit a bigger bonus, something like that.
Yeah, like when I got this initial role when I was a senior training specialist prior to becoming a principal, it was maybe $5,000 more than my total comp
Yeah.
before. So, I told my boss, I was like, man, this isn't really a pay raise. He's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's the job, you get the experience. I'm like,
It's a stepping stone.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
stepping stone. But then moving up to principal definitely helped bump me up a
Gets a
little bit
bump.
more.
Nice.
Which with the price of eggs now, like I don't know if it's I don't know
Oh,
if it's
tell me about the other thing is wild. I was at the store yesterday and I was just like, I
expensive.
can't believe this stuff anymore. Like this is
Yeah,
insane. But I used to work for wine sales actually, and we would have like our manager position would open up and they would always ask my buddy, the top sales guy in the company, one of hey, do you want to, step into the manager? And he's like, no. Like I make, much more because we were uncapped. You could, get whatever you could sell, you're getting parts of. So he's like, no, like I would rather keep doing my own thing, be on my own, not have to manage an entire team and make just as much, if not more, than the next job up. So I understand, the trade-offs and that, like, hey, but if you're going to use this to keep going up, like you can either stay at this position or keep moving up. So
right, right.
interesting. Um, when it comes to like job hierarchy, you said you had teammates, and then do you have like how many people under you? What's the structure like above you? Like if you were to want to take next steps in the company, or if you could, or if you, I don't know what the situation is, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so we so there's, like I said, Chad and Karen and myself. We work under Lauren, who is our manager, and she also manages. We have other teammates that don't work with our device. So
Okay.
there are teammates because we have the same manager, but we don't see them nearly as often as we see each other. So we have Bethany, Josh, and Brian who work more on the EP mapping side
Okay.
of things. So, for example, like if a patient needs what's called an ablation, where if you have, a arrhythmia, whether it's atrial fibrillation or, supraventricular tachycardia or something's going on with your heart that's not normal, right?
Yeah.
They'll go in and they'll create lesions and they'll do little they're gonna laugh at me if they ever see it. They'll be like, she didn't explain that very well. They probably
I
could
don't
explain
know.
it better than me, but it's again not my specialty, so I don't
Sure.
claim to know hardly any more than the average Joe. But
I think more than the average Joe.
so
I
they'll
mean,
create lesions, and it'll kind
yeah.
of it'll reinvigorate that normal sinus rhythm that we want to see in the heart. Kind of
Okay.
like telling the heart, like, hey, all these crazy, funny pathways that are traveling, like from an electrical standpoint, no more. You have to do it normally, and it's like burning to keep the pathway healthy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's what they do, and then we have the
Got it.
same manager because again, it's part of AFib or AF, but
Right.
atrial fibrillation solutions.
Gotcha. And then your sales team under you is
Yeah, so I don't have any direct reports.
okay.
I manage the field trainers, but they report to me more of as an advisor.
Okay.
Their manager hires, fires, and approves their expense reports,
Gotcha.
which is great because then I don't
Perfect.
have to
Yeah.
do that.
I don't want to do that. Yeah.
Um, so the field trainers, I train them, I help coach and develop them, like coaching the coaches, so to speak.
Sure.
And we work with them, and then we of course work with all of the new hire trainees. So at this
Gotcha.
point in my career, I've probably trained upwards of 200 people.
Wow.
We have an average, I think in the last couple of years, it's been an average of 20 to 25-ish per quarter, but per class, because we do one class a quarter. So it's been a lot. It's been a
Yeah.
lot of people. I think I just did the math in the last couple months, and I think it was like 198 then. So I'm like, yeah,
Wow.
now it's upwards of 200, which is
Jeez.
crazy.
Okay. Yeah, that's wild. Um, what is when you're taking on somebody to start coaching them or training them, do you have any advice? Like, what would be a typical piece of advice for a new hire that you would give?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I always laugh at this one because um, my coworker Chad, he's our comic relief. He's always very funny.
Love
Um,
that.
he'll always talk to the trainees, and he goes, "Seek to understand," and he
Okay.
gets at them like, "Guys, seek to understand." And I completely wholeheartedly agree with him there. He's obviously been in the industry also for a long time. But that being said, to kind of go along with that, you don't know what you don't know, and the more you know, the more you realize that there's so much more that you don't know.
Don't know. Yeah.
So I think with knowing more and being more educated, there comes this extra layer of humility, or to me, there should, right? Like
Sure.
there's always going to be that sense of, you know what, there's always a small possibility that what I think or what I feel to be right isn't correct.
Hmm.
Or something might go wrong, or something you can always be surprised.
Yeah.
So I think always carrying that extra layer of humility and being curious and asking questions is crucial for any of our new hires.
I agree.
Even if they're 6 months certified or 2 years certified, I mean, even still, I can walk into a case and, I'm not going to tell the doctor, hey, there's one right answer. We have to do it this way.
Hmm.
I always say we never speak in absolutes, right? That's the only time I
Right.
use an absolute, but
Yeah.
arguing in absolutes is always a bad idea.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit more vague advice in that sense.
No, I think that's good.
It kind of goes along with Chad's like seek to understand.
Right.
Which I agree, it's like, don't
Mhm.
memorize the stuff. You really have to internalize it and continue to ask questions.
Yeah, anybody can open the book and read but the actual understanding of what's happening and why and what for, that seems
Right.
to be how you could be more successful.
Yeah. And you're only in training once. I
Mhm.
just had this conversation with that VP I spoke about earlier, telling her about, some of the people that we both know and work with.
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, some of these people, they don't want to ask questions, or they're too afraid to look stupid. But I'm like, if you're in training, that's your excuse to look kind of dumb, like go for it. Because if you ask a dumb question and you are learning, you have an excuse. Someone's going to say, oh, well, they are learning. They don't
Mhm.
know. But if you go through that and you pass the tests and you meet the expectations and the competencies, Then a year from then, if you're
Yeah.
still making the same mistakes, no one's going to give you that pass anymore.
No,
Like
you're
you're past
expected
that
to know
point.
better. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
For like for doing medical sales, if I was the new hire, I was the person coming on and I had a background in sales, is there something that I should, either forget or something that I need to pick up that's specific to medical sales?
Yeah, I mean, so there's the short game and long game in sales in
Okay.
general, right? So you have the short
Sure.
game where say you're like a car salesman, right?
Hmm.
And you have a short game where you could talk a customer into a car, right?
Yeah.
And a car is a very long sales process in the sense of when someone buys a car, they're not going to turn around and buy a new car from you next month. I
Right.
mean, they might, like, who knows, they might want 7 cars,
But
but
traditionally,
it's
no, it's going to be a ways down.
right.
Hmm.
It's a very long span in that sense. So you could sell someone a car and they go drive off the car. And if they're not satisfied, your consequence is low.
Hmm.
But in terms of that short term sale, your consequence is like, okay, well, someone got a car they didn't like, whatever. And then say they don't come back to you, you're playing the short game.
Hmm.
In medical device sales, there is only the long game.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you have to establish credibility. You have to establish yourself as somebody that is trustworthy, that does the right thing, always for the patient first. I have run into reps in the field in my past, currently that do not have that mentality.
Right.
And I can tell you they do not last very long.
Yeah.
It's usually, the people that are like, oh, well, I'd rather leave this device than, not than like we call it abort the case, right? Where you just don't leave anything and then you don't get the sale. Uh, but that's obviously not what's best for the patient. Like, our philosophy, like definitely for Boston Scientific is you always have to put the patient first because when you do that, obviously you think about, hey, if this were my mom or my dad in the room, that's
Yeah.
like your own moral compass. But on
Right.
top of that, the physician, your customer, sees that you are a good person, that you want to do right by the patient, that you want
Right.
to do right also by them, not, we don't want to get anybody in trouble.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Then they trust you. They will come to you for future things, even if you change companies or if you do things like you're changing roles or anything like that. I mean, I still could talk to my old customers in San Diego and they're like, "Hey, how you doing? It's great to hear
Right.
from you. Hey, I have a question." So yeah, in med device, there's only the long game, and
Okay.
it's hard sometimes to say no to a sale, but
Right.
if you have to really put it in the mindset of like, is this the right thing to do?
I like that. Yeah, because that's something, with wine sales. Yeah, it's kind of the mixture of long and short, but it's mostly like, hey, get this stack of wine in, get this display in, and then we'll deal with the next one next month. We'll deal with the next one next month. It's not like
Right.
plan this super long thing out. So I that does make sense from a traditional sales job into going into medical sales. Something I always like to ask as we kind of get towards the end of the podcast here is there something that either you were hoping I would ask, you thought I would ask, we thought we would discuss that maybe we haven't touched on that you think is important for the viewer to know?
Hmm. I mean, you covered,
Nice.
the kind of long and short of it.
Yeah.
I think something that we didn't touch on a ton that I maybe just because this was my background,
Sure.
because I started in industry, fresh out of college, I got a job in pharmaceutical sales and I was very gung ho. I had a lot of, ambition in that sense.
Yeah.
For any younger viewers, maybe that are in the job market or entering the job market right now,
Yeah.
definitely don't stop trying. I will say I've trained a lot of I'm a millennial, so I've trained a lot of Gen Zers that are just
Nice.
coming in, and some are definitely better than others, and that goes along with having your act together and asking good questions, being humble. Um, And I know it's hard. You want to try to set boundaries early on, but sometimes, you kind of have to show people how hard of a worker you are before you
Right.
can kind of relax for a
Take the
second.
step
And
back. Yeah, sure.
yeah, and I know that's tough, but medical device, it's a very competitive industry. We do get paid very well.
Right.
And there's usually some good benefits and some good perks to work. I mean, Boston, we've got an amazing benefits package, and
Hmm.
um, the PTO is like, they're like, yeah, take time off if you need it,
Nice.
whatever you need to do.
But take time off after you get there, not before you get there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
Got
that's
it.
kind of the tricky thing that I'm noticing now.
Sure.
But in that regards, people are like, oh, well, I have a degree in underwater basket weaving. Could I,
Yeah.
do medical device sales? And if you have the right mentality, it definitely would be harder for sure because you don't have the medical background.
Hmm.
But I have a degree in business, so for me, I studied business and group dynamics and communication, and obviously that helps me every day in my job now.
Sure.
But when I was more so working in the cath lab and the EP lab and the hybrid OR, I'm like, I don't. I need to know more so like about needles and syringes and catheters
Yeah.
and how many cc's are going into this bucket, like,
Right.
so it was a stretch for me, but I learned it, and I
Yeah.
put my mind to it. So I think that's probably, if I leave anybody with that advice, I would that's what I would say.
Awesome. Yeah, I like that of like, hey, the kind of like you don't know what you don't know. So like, hey, if you think this will be good, could give it a shot and, be a sponge, absorb.
Yep. You can't be squeamish for sure because you'll see blood.
That's where I'm out. That's where I go, this job is not for me. This is
Yep.
for, other people, but I don't do good with the like stuff that's supposed to be inside your body, outside your body. No, I'm good on that. That all just needs to stay in there and no thank you. So that makes it a little tough. But that is a also good piece of advice of like, hey, if you think you're just going in and talking to doctors in their office and then heading out and you don't have to sit, that's not necessarily the case. Like you're gonna have to, see some things you may not want to.
And you can't be afraid of flying either, because we have a lot of people that have to jump on airplanes. And we had a trainee a while ago that was terrified of flying.
Oh no.
And I'm like, I'm sorry, this is not a good job for you. You're
No.
supposed to be on a plane like every week flying to your accounts.
Somewhere. Oh wow. Okay. Jeez. Yeah, but then
Not
even
always,
again.
but I mean,
But
when
no,
you're in
yeah.
training, you're flying a lot. And then
Oh
after a
yeah.
few months, it slows down.
That's like another good piece of information to know that I think a lot of people may not think of when they think of medical sales, that aspect of it. The last bit of the podcast that I always like to do is I like to give my guests some time to either talk about whatever they want to talk about, promote themselves, something, someone else, charity, cause, small business, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want the viewer to know here at the end. So here's your time.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Well, I've always supportive of my honey, my fiance Joe. He
Nice.
actually owns a dive company. So I mean, if you need another guest, he's a very
Heck
interesting
yeah.
person.
Okay, so look in the future for Joe's episode because that'll be coming.
For sure, for sure. But he owns a scuba diving company, Cozumel Abyss Divers. So obviously down in Cozumel.
Nice.
So if anyone is interested, I would. I mean, I'm biased, but he is a very, very good instructor.
Nice.
He does a lot of excursions with his customers and takes them to do cenote diving and obviously open water like ocean diving.
That's cool.
He's a technical instructor. He's a cave diver, so very, very, very skilled diver. And he's worked with a lot of people that absolutely love him. He's like got all of his 5 stars on TripAdvisor. So I always do
Sweet.
a little plug for my sweetie,
Love it.
which is so funny. We're a very odd couple. He's like Aquaman in the water all the time.
Yeah.
Like got his Merrill boots on, hiking through jungles, and here I am in like my business suit and my like
Hmm.
bun or whatever, like going to some corporate office somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah,
The
we've been together
balance.
several
It's the
years. So yeah, we've
balance.
got a good balance. And I mean, I keep up with him. I'm skiing this weekend, but he was just diving with sharks. So I'm like, I can't believe you went without me. And he's like, well, you can either ski black diamonds or dive with sharks, but you can't do both at the same time, you know? And
Yeah,
he's
it
like,
makes
you
it a
can be
little
an
tough.
adrenaline junkie,
Yeah.
but you got to pick one on
Yeah.
occasion. So,
I wonder if he could keep up with you. And you know what I mean? Like you're like, I can keep up with him doing all, but like, could he keep up with you? And like, would that translate to him like going in and trying to, sell medical devices? I don't know. Maybe not.
well, it's funny you say that because
Interesting.
just as a total like gimmick, I mean, I wasn't expecting him to do it. I actually gave him one of my tests because if like one of the tests I give the trainees because
Sure.
if he listens to my conference calls. Like if I'm working from our place down there, he'll walk by and he'll listen to me, or
Mhm.
he can explain what I do. He knows what the left atrial appendage is,
There you go.
and so I gave him one of the tests, and our passing rate is 90. So he didn't technically pass, but he got an 85. He did pretty good. So
I mean, that's pretty good for somebody who's not doing that. You know
I
what I mean?
know
Like, yeah.
he actually got our data questions wrong, but
Okay.
yeah, no, I mean he did a really solid job. I'm like,
Wow.
nice,
All
you're
right. All right.
listening. This is really
Nice.
good.
I like that. That's pretty cool. And then what was the company again?
Cozumel Abyss Divers is
Okay.
where he's at. So
Cool.
yeah, they're on Instagram, Facebook, all that jazz.
Nice. We'll put that in the show notes too, so that if people are, on YouTube, they can just click more info and it should be down there. So check that out
Awesome.
if you're going diving in Mexico. That sounds pretty
Yeah.
fun. And then other than that, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate it. I mean, you said a lot of words that I don't know, and I'm gonna have to go look up right now to make sure I know what I'm talking about in the future. But I really appreciate the information, and I think that it's important for people to know, like, hey, if you're not necessarily the salesperson, or that's not your fit, look for other avenues to do other things, because companies have a lot of jobs that people don't know about sometimes.
Yeah, that was something that I think even like I said, my brother's girlfriend, she's looking for
Mhm.
jobs right now. And, she didn't even realize half the stuff that exists. And neither did
Yeah.
I. And I'm like, wait, I can do this where I'm kind of doing sales, but I'm a clinical specialist and providing value and like fist bumping the physicians. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, good case, like you get
Love it.
that win, and so there's a lot of jobs out there. I mean, there's probably stuff like I still don't know about, I've been
Oh
in
yeah.
in the job market now for 10 years. So
Yeah. I've been in the Jobology podcast market for like a year and a half and I still don't know anything. So
that's
yeah,
all. Yeah, you're probably
that's what it
meeting. I
is.
think I know you interviewed my cousin Lindsay, who's a flight
Yep.
attendant. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
it's everyone's all over the place.
It's awesome. But thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, just have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the Jobology podcast. And thank you, Delaney, for all that useful information. Before I let you guys go, a couple quick reminders. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and follow at Jobology Podcast on all major social media. And make sure you're commenting what jobs you'd like to see next. Like we say to end every episode, make good choices.